9 p.m. and time for Sex Talk with the Siegel Brothers. Dr. Ricky Siegel is a certified sex therapist, educator, and supervisor, and his brother Larry Siegel is a clinical sexologist and certified sexuality educator. The Siegel Brothers are here to answer all your questions about sex and sexuality, but we're unsure who to ask, including questions you didn't even know you had. They will also welcome guests from around the globe to talk about a wide variety of topics and issues within the fascinating world of sexuality. Thank you for joining us, and welcome to Sex Talk.
Good evening, and welcome to Sex Talk with the Siegel Brothers. My name is Dr. Richard Siegel. I'm a certified sex therapist.
And I'm Larry Siegel, a clinical sexologist and certified sexuality educator.
And my super awesome brother.
That's, again, my favorite role.
Thank you for doing this with me for all this past year and a half.
Always my pleasure.
Yeah,
it's a few things I enjoy better than the things we do together.
My favorite night of the week. We did have a little joy this weekend. We met our new first cousin, twice removed. Welcome to the world, Hamilton, Sorota, and big love to Harrison.
Yes.
Harrison and Susan and Terry, we love you very much.
Yes, absolutely.
And greetings, thank you. Baby. Thank you for joining us. If you're listening on the radio in South Florida, we are on 95.3 FM and 1470 AM, if I could speak. We're also streaming live on Facebook. If you're watching, hello.
Hey.
Thank you for joining us.
Yes.
I hope our Palm Beach State College sex ed students are watching.
And psychology
hello.
And drug.
Pleasure to have you, especially our dual-enrolled high school students.
Yes, indeed.
You guys are awesome.
And everybody can join our conversation tonight. The phone lines will be open and available. And
they
you
won't
can
be.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. They won't be. We do have a guest.
That's right. We're going to continue our conversation with the wonderful Gregg Pizzi.
I misspoke.
Yes, you did. But you can get in touch with us by hitting that little send email button on the Facebook page for Sex Talk with the Siegel Brothers and comment. And our awesome producer, Freddie, will put it up on the screen so we can see your questions and comments.
Yeah. So definitely join us.
Yeah.
And so while we are waiting for our guest, what's been new and exciting this past week?
What's the week in sex? I haven't heard much.
Well, that in and of itself is a statement.
Yeah.
Not much going on in the world of sex this week.
No, of course. There's always something going on. I've just been, too busy.
Yeah. Well, again, we know it's still being political. It's still being just thrown about. Again, the thing that makes our skin crawl very often is, unfortunately, there seems to be more, I think, embracing of this concept of sex addiction and porn addiction, which we do rail against. And I think it's more of a function of that kind of erotophobia that sort of characterizes this society, that if it feels good, we're afraid of it. Yeah. If it's about sex, can't do it.
Well, we got past the sex is only for making babies and do it quick and hope it takes, you don't have to do it again until it's time to make another baby. That sex is for pleasure too, but
that's a pretty qualified but.
Not too much. Right. You don't want to get too crazy.
Right.
You don't
haven't
want to
we even heard people say, and actually this is a Carnes thing. You remember that part of that whole sex addiction, where that all came from, one of their core values is, sex can be for pleasure, but there are obvious limits.
Yeah, like obvious to
what
who?
Does that mean?
What does it mean?
And who sets those limits?
These kind of things that if you have sex to improve your mood, that's a sign of addiction. I think that's a sign of healthy coping.
Absolutely.
Right? Why is having sex because you're bored or because you're feeling down? Why is that a bad thing? That's an awesome thing.
But you got to remember, these are also the same people that are coming from this place of if you drink alcohol with the intention of changing the way you feel, they consider that problematic. If you take any kind of drug to change the way you feel, it's a problem. Unless,
Why
of
do
course,
you take a drug?
Unless, of course, it's a prescription.
Oh,
Why do people take antidepressants? Why do people take anxiolytics? Why do people take any of their drugs? So, it just makes me want to crawl up a wall when I hear these people talk, and they think they're sensible, and they think they're logical, and they think they're rational, and they're not.
But look at us, 30 years, we're still wanting to pull our hair out over this.
Well, right? You got to stay in the fight.
When are we going to catch on?
Stay in the fight. Hey, there's, we have the, I don't know about advantage, but I think we're very fortunate in that we have a lot more people that are on this side of the wave. There are more and more people that are being vocal. There are some amazing researchers that are showing, empirically based studies and evidence that stuff doesn't hold water.
No, of course not. And as a therapist, I've said it a million times. You don't call the symptom the disease,
right?
And call it a day,
right? And then, as we've talked about before, you also basically put it on hold, and you make sure that disease, quote unquote, stays in place and characterizes the relationships, their life forever.
That's the new permanent.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that's right. So, we have our guest tonight calling in. Gregg is on the phone.
Dr. Pizzi, welcome back. Can you hear us?
Can you hear us?
Guys.
Yeah, there he is.
I can see you and hear you.
Excellent.
Yeah, a little out of sync. I'm sure it'll click in a second, but we're glad to have you back. Our first time went by so quickly. We were talking about teletherapy, and then we got distracted with that nonsense with baby, it's cold outside.
Yeah.
And we just wanted to have you back because you've got a lot to offer and a lot of experience, and we were just getting started talking about what we usually end up falling into talking about, men and men's role in healthy sexuality, and most importantly, men's prevention of sexual violence.
Sure.
And we know, I don't go through your whole introduction again, but suffice it to say that Gregg is a brilliant sex therapist down in the Biscayne area of Florida, in Miami, and he was saying how he's doing primarily teletherapy these days. But if you could, I know you also have a very rich experience working with offenders, and I'd love to hear your take, Gregg.
Is that just men?
On really, how do you compare and contrast quote unquote normal men with men who offend, and where's that line, and where's the scripted behavior for the quote normal men that often pushes them over that line?
Sure. And if I can throw in, on top of that as well, Gregg, can you maybe look at this? Is there kind of a continuum of this masculinity and this sort of male sexual behavior where we can sort of put that on, just some sort of range with, not offending to offending? Do they work? Do they kind of blend into each other? Is there a continuum here?
Well, there's a big mouthful. What do you think, Doc?
Go.
Well, of course, each case is different, and everyone's etiology is different in terms of offenders' beginnings in their offense history. However, one of the biggest components that we find in sexual offenders is lack of empathy.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And and that's one of the things that I was actually thinking of when I'm kind of conceptualizing of this kind of continuum, because I think that's a really, really big piece. And I think that's something that a lot of men do sort of struggle with in their relationships, whatever kind of relationship that may be. Can you say something else about that?
Yeah, I would agree. I think it says everything, because in the sex offenders that I've worked with in the past have been heinous crimes, ranging from rape to murder to a combination thereof, and often with minors, and often repeated incidents that began, quite frankly, when the offenders were youth themselves. So the issue of masculinity is almost doesn't even come into the picture, because there's such a serious disconnect from the ability to put oneself in another's shoes and to feel what another person's feeling, that that issue of who's the leader, who's the assertive one, almost doesn't really come into play. However, as we've seen recently in social examples, we've been talking about recently these situations of date rape / Christmas songs / who said what. It gets to be more of a fine line.
Yeah. And, it makes me think of, I think it was our friend in Washington, Mike Vigorito, who was the first time I heard someone refer to a sexual narcissist. A guy who's not a narcissist, doesn't meet any of the diagnostic features of a narcissistic personality disorder, except when it comes to sex or when they're aroused, then you see a complete lack of partner empathy, a complete sense of entitlement that they're owed sex. You know, these are the features that I think you see in a lot of offending behavior. And I think date rape in many ways is even more potentially damaging, because when you have a psychotic rapist, you can see the pathology.
And you can separate from it.
Right. The date rapist is supposedly that normal guy who's just following some script that he's gotten his whole life, that this is the way you're supposed to act on a date.
So, yeah, and Greg, when you were talking about some of those things too, my first thought was, we're talking about personality disorders here. We're talking about psychosis. We're talking about, real distinct symptoms of psychopathology. But I think the point you're making, and that may be that sort of, that pivot point, if you will, between the psychopathology and men's behavior.
The script.
Yeah. I mean, do you see, and again, it comes back to that sort of blending along a continuum. Do you see that in what you're doing, Greg?
We initially started talking in the last time I was on with you guys that men have a very difficult time negotiating what's expected of them socially with their own needs, as well as the perceived expectations of their partner and what family, friends, and culture are going to think of them based on how they behave. Now, that in no way condones misbehavior, nor do hormones or testosterone.
Right.
But all of these things factor in, and I'm not a biologist or a scientist that has done studies on this, but I would really be curious to see studies that would take a look at how horniness or hormones affect a person's ability to make rational decisions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we know that's true to a degree with estrogen, right? As a mood and mind-altering hormone. Not quite sure about with testosterone, although it certainly can.
Like the writings of, who's that researcher, sociologist, Helen Fisher, like The Chemistry of Love and Why We Love. She basically says we're out of our minds when we're in that limerence.
Oh, sure.
That remember that kooky astronaut that drove across the country wearing diapers so she didn't have to stop to go, I don't know, beat up a...
Stalk and take her revenge. Yeah, that was a little
I
kooky.
remember that case.
We get a little crazy.
Yeah.
Even the best of us.
Yeah. I mean, it really does. I mean, there is, infatuation, being in love. It's almost a disease state.
The hormones, the PEA that run amok in the brain when we are falling in love, that is during the first 12 to 18 months of a relationship, literally cause us to go out of our minds. We do things, we say things that we would have never said, nor will we ever say again after that first year and a half are over.
This is true.
Those chemicals in the brain are designed to bond us to one another, to make a couple come together and stay together.
Yeah,
So there is actually a manipulation and a playing around with the mind that is meant to create bonding and copulation.
Yeah. I think where we've gotten screwed up over the years is this kind of integrating of all of these drives and then using that, and when it gets into the script, guys feel entitled. You made me horny, so you have to have sex with me. And I'm entitled. Once we get to a certain point, I'm good. You can't stop.
Well, it's almost like turning off the frontal cortex. That we have these urges, we may have these drives, and I think what people either forget or ignore is that we are always capable of volitional behavior. I mean, unless there's real pathology, unless you have some kind of organic brain damage, like bilateral frontal lobe or frontotemporal lobe damage, then it's not volitional. It's not. It's a real out of control type of behavior. But anything short of that is a choice, and we don't really stop and make rational choices when we're in those states. And I don't know where that disconnect is so consistent. I'm sorry, Greg?
It sounds like what you're describing. Sorry about that. Didn't mean to interrupt you.
No.
But there is a little bit of a delay in here. It sounds like what you're describing is a virtual kidnapping and taking hostage of the superego and allowing the id to run wild.
Yeah, which I think,
I like
in
that
a real
picture.
Freudian way, that's kind of part of the problem, that men need to understand that we have to maintain, a kind of driver's seat, no matter how aroused or excited or euphoric or however else you describe it, there has to be that superego, that conscience, that sense of other and protection and care, not to use another person to get off in or on or whatever.
But now, having just
Or
said
under.
that, let me throw this in there too. And I know, Greg, this is definitely something that you can speak extensively on. We're talking about all of this stuff in the context of what men do, especially in talking about behavior. But a lot of times, and a lot of problems in the relationship are this almost sense of entitlement, that sort of sense of this is what I want, that's all I really care about. But it ends up being something that they're kind of withholding. They're not doing things for their partner. And I think this is a part of that empathy issue as well. Not doing anything that their partner wants simply because their partner wants. It's sort of in itself, there's a selfishness and a disconnection there that's, I think, separate from what guys are doing, because this is about what they're not doing in their relationships, especially when it comes to empathy.
It's hard to generalize, of course, because in most of these situations, men are, carry a full range of emotions and abilities and levels of connection and levels of empathy. And most of the situations where there's, hurt feelings or physical hurt or, a combination of all of the above, it usually occurs within the context of a relationship that has had its own very good moments, healthy moments, loving moments, tender moments. I don't know exactly which cases, we're kind of mixing a lot of different things in one basket here. We have to be careful because I don't want to confuse the, sociopathological sex offenders that I've worked with in the past that were in locked facilities.
Right.
With men and women that are trying to find intimacy and closeness within the context of relationships on an everyday basis that make poor decisions or act out their own addictions or inability to use assertiveness with one another, because it happens with men and women. Yeah. And I also want to point out and remind the public that the sex therapy profession, sexology, is a science-based practice that takes into account human emotions and needs and the whole individual as well. It's not just I don't want people to I don't want people to get the sense that this is just an opinion-based or a discussion or sociological experiment. As you guys, as we all know, we studied and we did practicum trainings and we've been supervised and we've worked under research-influenced, guidance and done the reading of the research to use what we know about science and human behavior to help people who are having difficulty connecting on a human level through the use of sex. And sex is just one way that people communicate and miscommunicate.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That was really well said, Greg.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
I'm happy to hear that we can get callers with a guest on. So we have Jessica on the line. Do you have a question for Dr. Pizzi or Larry or I?
Yeah, I do have a question.
Hi, Jessica.
Thanks for calling in.
Hi, how are you?
We're good.
The question is, are men too shy to open up because their fear of getting rejected from women? Because women these days are a lot more dominant and strong and powerful.
It's a good question.
Yeah.
So are men afraid of opening up or feeling, I think we could say safe to say men are afraid to feel vulnerable, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're feeling vulnerable because women are are very career-driven these days. They have great jobs, and they're very dominant of, what they want in life. They're not wishy-washy, how they used to be.
It sounds like we are asking if, and I think it's a great question as well, it sounds like the question is women's empowerment rejecting men?
Or are men intimidated by women's empowerment?
Yeah.
Correct. It could go both ways.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think both are probably spot on.
Yeah, to be honest with you, I think this is age old.
Yeah.
I don't know that this is anything new.
So all of the ownership and dominance was kind of a defense against this all along, because we've all
Right.
secretly known that women are the stronger sex, and
That's right.
are just terrified to admit it.
I think deep down on a non-conscious
remember
level,
that-
many men are
That
intimidated
old
by women.
Calypso standard, man smart, women smarter.
Yeah.
I mean, look, they use twice as much of their brain as we do. How could we argue?
And more integration.
Thank you for
I
calling.
think, and I think that really is also important in the context of, looking at some of those, socio-psychological problems too, that how many times do men use violence, particularly sexually, as a way of trying to overcome or compensate for those feelings of inadequacy and vulnerability?
Greg, can you take that one?
Don't know if sorry, there was a little bit of a disconnect there. I didn't hear what the last thing that you said, Larry.
Just kind of looking at this idea of how much of this sort of, the bad behavior that we see, a lot of this offending behavior by men is kind of a compensation or a way of trying to overcome these feelings of inadequacy and vulnerability.
I guess it's possible, because when there's fear, there's lack of judgment, and when there's a need to accomplish something and one simply doesn't know how, I think that's probably more likely what might be going on nowadays. Men and women nowadays, I find in my practice, simply just are having a harder and harder time connecting. People do not know how to ask someone out on a date. I have had patients more and more recently asking me, what do you say when you like someone? What do you say to the person?
Right.
And I would find myself in sessions with patients literally
Like
saying,
role playing?
you say hello.
Yeah.
You say hello.
Uh-huh.
They do not know how to do that nowadays.
Right.
Yeah.
These millennials, these younger people now, it's extremely scary. They do not know how to connect, men and women alike. And I've had men telling me, to Jessica's question, men tell me, I just don't know what to say anymore. If I'm nice, and if I say, hey, how are you? What's your name? I get the same reaction as if I say, hey, what's up, babe? You're looking sexy.
Right.
And people are starting to really get desperate and feel hopeless and increasingly lonely.
Yeah.
It is odd that the more sexualized everything becomes, people are not having sex as much. Relationships don't seem to last as long.
Well, again, it depends on how you look at it. You could also look at it saying that relationships are lasting longer, yet there are very few relationships being had. Those that are maybe lasting longer. And I think there is a lot of this disconnection. And with men especially, and again, I'm coming back to this ego, because I cannot discount the impact of just the generalized male ego in a lot of this kind of behavior. And I get worried when I read about groups that are growing and getting bigger, like these incels. Are you familiar with that group, Greg? Incels?
No.
I guess that's short for involuntary celibate.
Celibate. These are these angry guys that feel entitled to,
basically do what they want because they're
feel
bitter
like
and
they're
resentful
owed-
because they can't get
yeah.
laid.
And it's women's fault that they
Right.
can't get laid.
Right.
Not that they're a-holes.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So, there, I think there's a lot of this kind of, again, just compensatory behavior. Right? So what does it mean, to moving into this new year? What does it mean as we move future and toward the end of the show here, to embrace a healthy masculinity? Is there a direction we can help move people in?
Well, I think that the direction we need to go is actually increased empathy and understanding, because people are not a-holes for the most part. I think that they play the part very well, though, because people don't know how to connect and how to communicate. So they really start grasping for straws and acting in all kinds of ways that don't achieve what they want. I really think there's got to be increased communication, openness, and ability for people to talk about how they feel and the frustration of loneliness. And this show is one of the ways that that can start to happen with people as people become more aware that it is okay to talk about these things. Some people might see the name of your show and get intimidated by saying, "Oh, that show's not for me. I don't have sex. I don't know anything about sex."
Yeah.
So, not that it's not that we need to change the name of the show.
No, but I hear your
people
point.
are not having sex. You made a great point. People are not having sex. And the more we have the apps and the electronic technology, that does not mean that people are connecting more.
No, and I think a lot of connections people are making are kind of delusional.
Well, remember, I know we're going to have to close pretty soon, but remember the big Ashley Madison scandal, not just the bust of how many tens of thousands of guys were outed, but that almost all the women don't exist.
Yeah.
They're computer, what do they call them, profiles. That's really scary.
Big business.
Yeah, it really is. And when you look at all those websites and things that are out there, I mean, Ashley Madison is old news now.
Sure.
Right? But, again, these relationships, quote unquote, that people have. Oh, I've never loved anybody. I've loved this person and I've had the best relationship I've ever had for the last 3 years, but I've never met them. I've only seen the picture they sent me, but this is the love of my life.
That's that
I mean,
catfishing
it's
thing,
kind of delusional.
which
Yeah.
is very lonely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it does speak, I think, to this
Heartbreaking is what it is.
disconnection and this lack of empathy. Right? So with our final minute, looking at how men can maybe take a step closer to experiencing empathy in their relationships. One or two keys. What can guys do to kind of help them?
Talk to your partners. Talk to your family. Talk
be
to your
afraid.
friends. Try to not be exactly, Ricky. Try to not be afraid. Try to speak up and say, "Hey, you know what? I don't know what to say to this girl I'm going to see tonight. I really like her. I don't know what the heck to say."
Yeah.
And open up a conversation. And we all have to be compassionate to one another. And you guys are doing a great job of opening up that flow of communication. And I hope
Thank
that
you
people
so
will
much.
continue to
Thank
benefit.
you.
Thanks for joining us
And
again.
I just want to throw one quick thing in there, too, because in order for this to really also to happen, guys have to be willing to take a risk. And that risk may be rejection. That risk may be that they don't want what you have. But if we're not willing to take that risk and open up, it's never going to happen.
Well,
Thanks so much, Greg.
really,
And thank you.
thanks to everyone for listening, and thanks for the call in. And please hit that like button and share us on Facebook. And join us next Monday and every Monday, 9 o'clock on the East Coast for Sex Talk with the Siegel Brothers.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. Have a great week.
Take care,
Bye,
Greg.
guys.
Thanks again.
You've been listening to Sex Talk with the Siegel Brothers. Join us every Monday night at 9 p.m. on WNN, 1470 AM and 95.3 FM. Or watch live streaming video at AMP2 TV Productions on Facebook, or look for the shows on YouTube. Thanks for tuning in, and we hope you'll join us again next week. The opinions expressed on the